For your bell work today, we're going to review something we learned last week. Solve the inequality and graph the solution on the line provided. Pause the video here for 5 minutes. Let's break down our bell work. We're trying to solve for x. Our first step is to subtract 6 from both sides. I bring down the negative 2x, and I'm left with negative 10 on the right-hand side. My next step is to divide both sides by negative 2. Because I'm dividing by a negative, our symbol is going to switch sides. Now I see that my answer is all the x's less than or equal to 5. So I'm going to go plot a point at 5. And it's all my x's less than that number. Today we're going to learn about functions, how to determine if something is a function, and how to interpret function notation. We are learning about functions because they exist almost everywhere in the real world. A function is basically a machine where you put in an input and get out an output. On the left-hand side, you see some examples of some real-world functions. The most interesting one is that forensic scientists can actually determine the height of a person based on the length of their femur. So your height is a function of your femur length. Other ones are money is a function of the time spent earning it. Your temperature is a function of certain variables, or the temperature depends on a variety of variables. So let's dive into learning about functions. A function is any rule where each input, or x, has exactly one output, or y. We're going to look at two graphs to see which one's a function and which one is not. So if I look at the graph on the left, I'm going to check a couple of inputs. Let me check this input right here. I see with this input, I have one output. Let me check a couple more. With this input, I have one output. With this input, I have one output. So this one is a function because each x has exactly one y. Let's take a look at this graph over here. I'm going to test a couple of inputs. Here's an input. It has an output up here, and it produces an output, a y, down here. Let's check a couple more. This x has an input up here, but also one all the way down here. This one is not a function because each input is producing more than one output. We can also look at a table to determine if a relationship is a function. So I'm going to start by mapping my inputs to my outputs. My inputs are my x's. So I'm going to make a list of my inputs. That's 0, 1, and 4. I understand that 1 was written more than once, and so was 4. But I'm making a list of the inputs, so I don't need to write them more than once. I'm now going to map each input to its output. So let's see, 0 maps with 0, 1 maps with negative 1 and positive 1, and 4 maps with negative 2 and positive 2. This is not a function because the inputs had more than one output. Let's look at this table over here. I'm going to map each input to its output. So my inputs are negative 2, 0, 2, 4, and 6. I'm going to map each one to its output. So -2 maps to 11, 0 maps to 7, +2 maps to 11. It's okay that the 11 repeats because it's a matter of each x having just one y. 4 maps to 23, 6 maps to 43. So this one is a function because each input has its own output. Each x only produces one y. So now you try. Fill in the blanks using the word bank to see if you remember the definition of a function. You should have filled it out as a function is a rule where each x or input has exactly one y, also known as an output. When something is a function, we can name it using function notation, which is right down here. Function notation is pronounced f of x. If you saw function notation like this, you would pronounce it g of x. That's how we signal to people that this relationship between our numbers is a function. When you look at function notation, this number right here is your input. This question is asking me when my input, my x, is 0, then what is my output, my y? Well, I'm going to go read the table and see that when x is 0, y is 6. So let's check for understanding. When you see f of 2 is to the input, the x, or the output, the y. Take 30 seconds to select the right answer. You should have selected input. F of any number means that number is our input. With your group, brainstorm what you think f of x equals 10 might mean. What could x be? I'll give your group 4 minutes. Hopefully you realize that f of x equals 10 means that 10 is the output. And you are wondering what the input is if the output is 10. So let me look at my outputs. When my output, my y, is 10, it looks like the input was 1. So we can say that f of 1 equals 10, or x equals 1. Let's check for understanding. Label each number as either the input or the output. Then write the correct ordered pair. I'll give you 90 seconds. We should have labeled the 2 as the input, the 14 as the output, which means our ordered pair would have looked like 2, 14. Now, on your own, look at the table below and use it to answer the questions. Pause the video here and give yourself 4 minutes to answer the questions. Let's go over the answers. If we saw f of 3, that means my input is 3. So I need to look at my table and see that when the input is 3, the output is 85. And for question 2, I need to fill in the blanks. After blank number of hours, the temperature is blank. Well, if 3 is my input, 3 would be my number of hours. So I'm going to write after 3 hours, and temperature was the output. So I see that after 3 hours, the temperature is 85 degrees Fahrenheit. If you got both questions right, you are Tier 1. If you got question 1 right, but question 2 wrong, you are Tier 2. And if you struggled with both questions, you are Tier 3. Let's summarize what we learned today. In 2 to 3 sentences, summarize what you've learned using the sentence stem, "Today I learned." Pause the video here for 3 minutes while you reflect. Tier 3 students will begin by matching ordered pairs with their correct function notation. Tier 2 students will begin by choosing the correct input or output based on what they're given. Tier 1 students will explain the meaning of 4 function notation statements in context. When you finish, you can do some ACT prep for extra credit.